September 19th, 1944. A Sherman tank named In the Mood rolled down a narrow road near the German town of Münsterbusch, just south of Aachen. Staff Sergeant Lafayette stood in the open turret hatch, scanning the road ahead with his bare eyes. He always rode like this, head and shoulders exposed above the armor, no protection. His crew begged him to button up, to close the hatch, to stay inside where the steel could save him. He refused. Every single time, he refused. He needed to see. Seeing meant surviving. Seeing meant shooting first. And shooting first was the only reason any of them were still alive after 81 days of continuous combat. The road curved left. A tree line ran along the right side. The column of American vehicles stretched behind him. Poole's tank was in the lead. It was always in the lead. That was the rule. His rule. Nobody rode in front of War Daddy. Not today. Not any day since Normandy. He never saw the gun that ended his war. The first round hit the tank on the right side. Steel screamed. Sparks sprayed across the turret. The tank lurched sideways. Before Poole could shout a command, a second round slammed into them. The impact flipped the 33-ton Sherman into a roadside ditch. Poole was thrown from the turret like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard. He tried to stand. His right leg would not work. He looked down. The leg was nearly severed below the knee. Blood pulsed from the wound in rhythmic surges. Bone was visible through the torn flesh. He could feel the heat of the burning tank behind him, but could not feel anything below his right knee. Shock was setting in. His vision blurred. The sky above him was grey and indifferent. He was 25 years old. He had been fighting for 81 consecutive days. In those 81 days, his 5-man crew had destroyed more enemy vehicles than any other tank crew in the United States Army. The official count would reach 258. Tanks, half-tracks, armored cars, self-propelled guns, trucks, and towed artillery pieces. 258 German vehicles, burning behind one Sherman tank with the words, "In the Mood" painted on its hull. And now that Sherman was on its side in a ditch, smoke pouring from every opening, and the man who had led it through France, Belgium, and into Germany was bleeding to death in the mud beside it. But this story does not start in a ditch outside Aachen. It starts in a small town in South Texas, where a boy with fast hands and a stubborn streak was about to become the deadliest tank commander America ever produced. Lafayette Green Poole was born on July 23, 1919, in the tiny town of Odem, Texas. Population barely 500. Flat, dry, dusty ranch country in San Patricio County, a place where the wind never stopped and the horizon stretched flat in every direction. He had a twin brother named John Thomas. The two boys grew up poor, Catholic, and competitive. Lafayette was small but quick. He had a jaw like a fist and eyes that missed nothing. He graduated valedictorian from his Catholic school, which meant he was the smartest kid in a school where most of the students would end up working cattle or drilling oil. He enrolled at Texas A&I, which is now Texas A&M Kingsville, to study engineering. He wanted to build things. He was good with his hands and good with numbers, but his real talent was fighting. Poole became a Golden Gloves boxer. He fought at 165 pounds and won the sectional championship at New Orleans. He was fast, aggressive, and nearly impossible to hit. His footwork was exceptional. He could slip punches that other fighters never saw coming and counter with combinations that ended fights. According to accounts from fellow soldiers, he once sparred an exhibition round with Joe Louis, the heavyweight champion of the world, during a morale event in England in the spring of 1944. Louis outweighed him by at least 60 pounds. Poole did not care. He climbed into the ring anyway. That was who Lafayette Poole was. You tell him the odds are against him, and he steps forward, not back. You tell him the other man is bigger, stronger, better armed, and he looks you in the eye and says he is leading this time. In June 1941, Lafayette Poole enlisted in the United States Army, volunteering despite an old eye injury that could have kept him out. His twin brother, John Thomas, joined the Navy. Lafayette reported to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio for basic training, then moved to Camp Beauregard in Louisiana for armored instruction with the 40th Armored Regiment. The Sherman tank did not exist yet. Poole trained on the machines the Army had in 1941, M3 Stuart light tanks and obsolete M3 Lee medium tanks with riveted hulls and a cramped, awkward turret layout. The army taught him how to maintain these vehicles, how to repair engines in the field, how to replace track links and road wheels. He started as a mechanic, crawling under vehicles with wrenches and grease on his hands. When the division later received the new M4 Sherman medium tanks in the spring of 1942, Poole learned those too. Then they put him inside a tank. They sat him in the commander's seat and let him direct the crew through training exercises. Everything changed. Poole took to armored warfare the way he had taken to boxing. He understood the machine instinctively. Its weight, its speed, its turning radius, its angles of attack, its blind spots. More than that, he understood what a tank was supposed to do. A tank was not a pillbox. It was not a bunker on treads. A tank was a fist. You drove it straight at the enemy and you hit him before he hit you. Speed was armor. Aggression was survival. The man who fired first lived. The man who hesitated burned. Poole never hesitated. The army recognized his talent immediately. They offered him officer candidate school. Poole turned it down. Officers commanded from the rear. Poole wanted to command from the front, from inside the turret of a tank, where the fighting happened. In September of 1943, shortly before the division shipped out to England, his superiors offered him a commission again. He turned that down too. He wanted to stay with his crew, not sit in a command post reading reports about the fighting. Later, in France, after weeks of combat had proven him beyond all doubt, his superiors offered him a battlefield commission. He turned it down a third time. Every single time the army tried to promote Lafayette Poole away from his crew, he said no. He was a staff sergeant. That was enough rank. His crew was everything. He called them his Pups. The Pups were 4 men who would become the most effective tank crew in the European theatre of operations. They came from different states, different backgrounds, and different temperaments. The army threw them together inside a steel box, and they became a family. Corporal Wilbert Richards was the driver. They called him Red, sometimes Baby. He was about 5 feet 4 inches tall, compact and tough, from Cumberland, Maryland. Richards had hands like a surgeon on the tank controls. He could thread a 33-ton Sherman through gaps between hedgerows that would make other drivers refuse to try. He could back the tank into a hull-down position at speed, shaving inches from stone walls without scraping. He drove by instinct, feeling the terrain through the controls, anticipating slopes and ditches before the tracks reached them. Private First Class Bertrand Close was the assistant driver and bowgunner. They called him Schoolboy, because he looked like he should still be in a classroom. He was barely 18 years old when they shipped overseas, from Portland, Oregon. Close operated the hull-mounted 30-caliber machine gun and served as the extra pair of eyes up front. He was young, eager, and utterly fearless in the way that only very young soldiers can be. Corporal Willis Oller was the gunner. They called him Groundhog. He was 29 years old, the oldest man in the crew, from Morrisonville, Illinois. Oller was the key to everything. A tank crew lives or dies on the accuracy of its gunner. Oller never missed. A war correspondent who later wrote about the crew described Oller as a man who saw all of France through the sights of his gun. He could put a 76mm armor-piercing round through a target at 1,000 yards, while the tank was moving over rough ground. He could traverse the turret, acquire a target, adjust for range and lead, and fire in seconds. By the time the brass casing hit the turret floor, he was already looking for the next target. Technician 5th grade Delbert Boggs was the loader. They called him Jailbird. He was about 22 years old, from the border country between Ohio and West Virginia. The nickname came from a rumor that he had enlisted partly to avoid legal trouble back home. True or not, Boggs was the fastest loader in the battalion. He could pull a 76mm round from the ready rack, slam it into the breech, close the breech block, and yell ready before anyone else in the division could finish the same sequence. In a tank fight, the difference between life and death was often the speed of the loader. Boggs was fast enough to keep his crew alive for 81 straight days. 5 men, 1 tank. Poole found the targets. Oller killed them. Richards kept them moving. Close covered their flanks. Boggs kept the gun fed. They trained together, ate together, slept in the same cramped steel box together. They breathed the same engine fumes. They heard the same shells hit the ground outside. They felt the same concussions shake the hull. If one man failed, all 5 died. Poole understood this deeply. That is why he never left them. That is why he turned down every promotion. Not because he did not want rank, because he did not want distance from the men who depended on him and on whom he depended with his life. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. The 3rd Armored Division, nicknamed the Spearhead Division, did not land on D-Day itself. They began arriving at Omaha Beach on June 23rd and 24th, wading ashore through the wreckage of the initial landings, past burned-out landing craft, past the craters in the sand, past the crosses already standing in the temporary cemetery above the high water mark. The division moved inland immediately. The hedgerow country of Normandy was a nightmare for tanks. The bocage was a landscape of ancient earthen walls, 6 feet thick and topped with dense vegetation, lining every field and every lane. The walls were centuries old, packed with roots and stones, dense enough to stop a tank. German infantry hid behind them with Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets. A Panzerfaust was a simple, disposable weapon that cost the Germans almost nothing to manufacture. It could be carried by a single soldier. And it could destroy a Sherman tank at close range with a single-shaped charge that burned through the armor and filled the interior with molten metal and superheated gas. The hedgerows turned every field into an ambush kill zone. A tank could not see what was on the other side of the wall until it was climbing over it. By then, it was too late. The Panzerfaust would fire from 20 yards away, and the crew would never know what hit them. The Sherman tank was the backbone of the American armored force. The army had built nearly 50,000 of them by the end of the war. They were reliable, mechanically sound, and easy to repair in the field. A good maintenance crew could replace a damaged engine in a few hours. Parts were interchangeable across variants. The transmission was robust. The tracks held up well on European roads. But against German armor, the Sherman was dangerously outmatched. A German Panther tank weighed 45 tons and carried frontal armor over 3 inches thick, sloped at 55 degrees. The Sherman's 75mm gun could not penetrate that armor at normal combat ranges. The Panther's high-velocity 75mm cannon could destroy a Sherman from well over a mile away. The German Tiger was even worse. Its 88mm gun could kill a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman could not even scratch the Tiger's paint. American tankers knew the math. They talked about it in quiet voices in their bivouac areas at night. They knew they were driving an inferior machine into combat against better armed opponents. The Sherman's armor was thin enough that a German 88mm round could pass through both sides of the hull without slowing down. When a penetrating round hit a Sherman, the interior became a hurricane of metal fragments, spalling off the inside surface of the armor plate and shredding everything and everyone inside. If the ammunition stored in the hull ignited, the tank became a crematorium. After the war, veterans and historians gave the Sherman a grim nickname. They called it the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter, because it seemed to catch fire every time it was hit. Whether that name was actually used during the war itself remains debated, but the fear behind it was real. The advantage the Sherman had was numbers. The Americans had thousands of them. The Germans could never build enough Panthers and Tigers to match that production. Ford, Chrysler, and Fisher Body churned out Shermans on assembly lines designed for automobiles. The American strategy was brutal in its simplicity. Overwhelm the enemy with volume, accept losses. Replace destroyed tanks with new ones before the crews had finished burying the dead from the old ones. Keep pushing forward. For the 5 men inside each Sherman, that strategy meant something very specific. It meant that on any given day, in any given engagement, their tank could be the one that burned, and they climbed inside it anyway. Every single morning, they climbed inside it anyway. They closed the hatches, started the engine, and drove toward the sound of guns. That is not bravery in the way that medals describe it. That is something quieter and more difficult. That is the decision to do a terrifying job when the odds say you should refuse. Poole's crew received their first Sherman, an M4A1 with a 75mm main gun, Poole painted, "In the Mood" on the hull, naming it after the Glenn Miller swing tune. He stenciled the letters himself. The crew made it their home. They stored personal items in the sponson boxes. They draped extra tarpaulins over the engine deck for shade. They hung ammunition belts where they could reach them fast. They turned a factory-produced machine into their own. If you want to know what happened when War Daddy took In the Mood into combat for the first time, please like this video. Every like pushes this story to someone who has never heard of Lafayette Poole, and he deserves to be remembered. Please subscribe. On June 29, 1944, the 3rd Armored Division entered combat for the first time near the town of Villiers-Fossard, close to Saint-Lô. Poole's tank led the advance. The fighting was immediate and close. German infantry and armour contested every hedge line, every crossroads, every stone wall. Machine gun fire rattled off the Sherman's hull. Mortar rounds dropped in the fields around them. The acrid smell of cordite and burning diesel filled the air. In the Mood pushed forward through the Bocage country. Poole, standing in the open hatch, his head and shoulders exposed to enemy fire, scanning for targets, calling directions to Richards, feeding coordinates to Oller. He was a perfect target. Snipers could have killed him. Shrapnel could have taken his head off. He did not care. He could see, and seeing was everything. In that first engagement, Poole's tank was responsible for the destruction of over 70 German soldiers and 3 armoured vehicles. 70 men and 3 vehicles on the very first day of combat. The other tank commanders in company I watched Poole operate and understood immediately that this crew was different. Poole did not wait for orders. He did not hesitate at the tree line. He did not sit in a defensive position and wait for the enemy to come to him. He attacked. He drove straight at the German positions, fired on the move, flanked strong points, cut off retreat routes, and crushed resistance before it could organize. He fought his tank the way he fought in the boxing ring, fast, aggressive, always moving forward, never giving the other man time to set his feet. But the hedgerows were unforgiving, and the Panzerfaust did not care how brave you were. Near Villiers-Fossard, a German soldier hiding behind a stone wall fired a Panzerfaust at In the Mood from close range. The rocket struck the hull. The shaped charge burned through the armour plate. Smoke and fire filled the interior. The crew bailed out through the hatches, scrambling over the sides and dropping to the ground. All 5 men survived. The first In the Mood was dead, burned out, smoking, abandoned on a Norman lane with scorch marks on its hull, and the name still legible through the soot. Poole did not mourn the machine. He mourned the lost time. He wanted a new tank immediately. On July 1st, the army gave him one. This time it was an M4A1 with a 76mm gun and wet ammunition stowage. The 76 was a meaningful upgrade. It fired a heavier round at higher velocity. It could penetrate more armour at longer ranges. It could not kill a Panther from the front, but it could kill one from the side or rear at combat distances. The wet stowage meant the ammunition was stored in bins, surrounded by a mixture of water and antifreeze. If an enemy round penetrated the hull, the liquid would douse any fire before the ammunition could cook off and blow the tank apart. It was not perfect protection, but it significantly improved the crew's odds. Poole painted In the Mood on the hull of the new tank. Second tank, same name. The crew climbed inside and closed the hatches. They were back in the war. Through the rest of July, Poole's crew carved a path of destruction across Normandy. The vehicle count started climbing. 5 vehicles destroyed, then 10, then 20. The crew developed a reputation within the 3rd Armored Division as the most aggressive tank in the regiment. Poole led his platoon from the front in every single engagement. When the column moved, In the Mood was at the point. When the column stopped, Poole was the first one scanning the terrain ahead. When the order came to attack, Poole's tank moved before the radio transmission finished. On July 25th, Operation Cobra launched. This was the breakout that would shatter the German line in Normandy. Massive aerial bombardment by heavy bombers pulverized the German positions west of Saint-Lô. Thousands of tons of high explosive cratered the ground and destroyed defensive positions that had held for weeks. When the smoke cleared, the 3rd Armoured Division poured through the gap. The hedgerow fighting was over. Now it was open country, rolling farmland, long straight roads, fields that stretched to the horizon, speed and firepower. This was exactly what Poole and his crew were built for. In the Mood led attack after attack through the Cobra breakout. The advance was relentless. Towns that appeared on the map as names became flashes of stone walls and church steeples seen through dust and gun smoke. Marigny fell, then Bressy, then a dozen villages whose names the crew never learned. German resistance varied from fanatical to non-existent. Some positions fought to the last man. Others were abandoned before the Shermans arrived, empty foxholes and discarded equipment marking where the defenders had been hours before. Poole insisted on taking point in every advance. 21 major attacks during the 81-day campaign, and Poole led every single one. Not because orders required it, because he believed the commander should see the ground before anyone else. He should be the first to spot the ambush, the first to call the target, the first to absorb the risk. His crew developed a rhythm that bordered on mechanical perfection. Poole would spot a target from the open hatch, a half-track at 400 yards, a truck column emerging from a tree line, an anti-tank gun being set up at a crossroads. He would call the range and direction to Oller. Oller would traverse the turret and fire. The target would burn. Boggs would have the next round loaded before the brass casing hit the turret floor. Richards would already be moving the tank to the next firing position, sliding behind a rise or a stone wall that would mask them from return fire. Close would sweep the flanks with his bow-mounted 30-caliber machine gun, suppressing any infantry that tried to close with a Panzerfaust. The whole sequence took seconds. Spot, call, fire, reload, and move, over and over again, every day, for weeks without rest. The vehicle count climbed relentlessly. 50 destroyed, 75, 100. Half-tracks burned on the roadsides. Armored cars lay shattered in fields. Truck convoys smouldered in columns along the retreat roads. Towed anti-tank guns sat silent, their crews dead around them, their shields perforated by 76mm armor-piercing rounds. Poole's crew did not discriminate between target types. Everything that moved in a German uniform and carried a weapon or transported supplies was a target. If it had wheels or tracks, Oller put a round through it. If it carried infantry, Close raked it with machine gun fire. If it tried to retreat, Richards chased it down. By mid-August, the Allies were closing the Falaise Pocket, a massive encirclement designed to trap the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army in Normandy. The fighting was savage. Entire German divisions tried to break out of the closing ring, pushing through narrow corridors under constant air attack and artillery bombardment. The roads were choked with destroyed vehicles and dead horses. Columns of prisoners marched west with their hands on their heads. Abandoned equipment littered every field. The smell of decomposition was unbearable in the August heat. Poole's crew pushed through it all, barely stopping. The interior of the tank was stifling. Temperatures inside a Sherman in summer could reach well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The crew sweated through their uniforms. Their skin stuck to the metal surfaces. The air tasted of engine oil and hot brass. They kept fighting. Near the village of Rains, In the Mood engaged a German rearguard, trying to hold open an escape corridor for retreating forces. Poole directed fire into a line of half-tracks attempting to cross an open field. Oller walked rounds across the column. 3 half-tracks burned, then a 4th. German infantry scattered from the burning vehicles and ran for the nearest hedgerow. Close raked them with the bow gun. The survivors disappeared into the brush. Near the village of Colombier, In the Mood blundered into an assembly area of the German 2nd Panzer Division. This was one of the Wehrmacht's elite armoured formations, equipped with Panther tanks. Poole had seconds to react. The engagement was sudden and close. A Panther could destroy a Sherman from the front at any range. Its frontal armour was practically immune to the Sherman's 76mm gun. But Poole knew, and every American tanker knew, that the Panther's side armour was thinner. You never fought a Panther head-on. You flanked it. You manoeuvred. You put a round into its side where the 76 could punch through. Richards threw the Sherman into a hard turn. Poole called targets. Oller traversed. In the chaos of the meeting engagement, Poole's crew knocked out 2 Panther tanks and several armoured cars. They fired first, and they fired accurately. They survived because Oller never missed and Richards never stopped moving and Poole never stopped seeing. But the second, In the Mood, was living on borrowed time. On August 17th, near the town of Fromentel, the tank was destroyed, not by the Germans, by the United States Army Air Forces. A P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft, flying close air support for American ground forces, misidentified Poole's Sherman as a German vehicle. The pilot dove and fired. Rounds from the fighter's cannons tore into the Sherman's thinner top armour. The tank shuddered and began to smoke. The crew bailed out for the second time in the war, throwing open hatches and rolling over the sides into the French dirt. All 5 men survived for the second time. Bruised, burned, shaken, but alive. Poole stood up, brushed himself off, and looked at his burning tank. It was the second In the Mood he had lost. The first had been killed by a German Panzerfaust, which was expected. This one had been killed by his own Air Force, which was not. Friendly fire, the euphemism that covered one of war's most infuriating failures, there was no one to be angry at. The pilot could not distinguish a Sherman from a Panzer at high speed from altitude. Identification panels and coloured smoke markers were supposed to prevent this. They did not always work. The crew had almost been killed by their own side, and there was nothing to do about it except climb into another tank and keep going. The army gave Poole a third Sherman within days, another M4, A1 with the 76mm gun and wet stowage. Poole painted in the mood on the hull for the third time. The crew climbed inside for the third time. They had been fighting for nearly 2 months straight. They had lost 2 tanks. They had not lost a single man. They were not finished. The third, in the mood, carried Poole's crew through the most intense phase of their 81-day war. In late August, the American advance was moving at a pace that outran its own supply lines. Fuel ran short. Ammunition had to be rationed, but the Germans were retreating faster than the Americans could chase them, and stopping now would give the enemy time to reorganize. Every commander pushed forward. Poole pushed hardest. The crew reached the Aisne River crossings near the cities of Soissons and Laon in northeastern France. The Aisne was a significant water obstacle, and the Germans had blown most of the bridges. American engineers worked under fire to span the river, while infantry and armour provided covering fire from the western bank. Once the crossings were secured, the armour poured across. Poole's tank was among the first over. On the eastern side, the Germans had established rearguard positions to slow the pursuit. Anti-tank guns covered the main roads. Infantry squads with Panzerfausts hid in the villages. Tank destroyers, German Jagdpanzers and Sturmgeschütz assault guns waited in hull-down positions behind stone walls and farmhouse ruins, their low profiles nearly invisible until they fired. Every crossroads was a potential death trap. Between August 29th and August 31st, 1944, Poole's crew fought the engagement that would earn him the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor in the United States Army. For 3 consecutive days, Poole led his tank forward into contested ground, engaging the enemy at ranges that varied from over 1,000 yards to point blank. The official citation describes the action in measured military language. Commanding the lead tank, alone, Staff Sergeant Poole accounted for 4 German tanks, 3 anti-tank guns, approximately 50 unarmored vehicles, and an overwhelming number of enemy personally killed or wounded. Think about those numbers for a moment. 4 tanks, not half-tracks, not trucks, tanks. Armored fighting vehicles crewed by trained men who were trying to kill Poole as urgently as he was trying to kill them. 3 anti-tank guns, weapons specifically designed to destroy Shermans, each one capable of ending the crew's war with a single well-aimed shot, and 50 unarmored vehicles, a retreating army's logistical lifeline burning on the roads of France, all in 72 hours. The crew did not rest between engagements. They refueled from passing supply trucks. They rearmed from ammunition dumps. They ate cold rations on the engine deck between firefights. They slept in shifts, 2 hours at a time, inside the hull of the tank. Then they moved forward and attacked again. September brought the liberation of Belgium. The 3rd Armoured Division raced east from France, covering distances that would have been unimaginable during the hedgerow fighting. The flat country of Wallonia stretched open before them, with wide roads and long sightlines that favoured the attackers. The Germans were in full retreat now, their formations shattered by Normandy and the Falaise disaster. What had been organised divisions were now fragments, battle groups cobbled together from survivors of destroyed units, moving east as fast as they could, trying to reach the safety of the Siegfried Line before the Americans caught them. Poole's crew caught them. Mons fell on September 3rd. Namur followed. Then Liège. In every town, Belgian civilians lined the streets, cheering, waving homemade flags in the national colours, throwing flowers at the passing American tanks. Women ran alongside the Shermans, handing up bottles of wine and loaves of bread. Old men stood in doorways and saluted. Children climbed on top of stationary tanks and had to be lifted down by laughing soldiers. 4 years of German occupation ended with the rumble of Sherman engines coming from the west. Poole acknowledged them from his turret hatch with a wave and a nod. Then he faced forward again and kept driving east. There were still Germans ahead of him. Celebration could wait. On September 5th, near the city of Namur, Pool's crew achieved what was almost certainly a single-day record for an American tank crew in the European theatre. In 24 hours of nearly continuous fighting, In the Mood destroyed 1 Sturmgeschütz, self-propelled assault gun, and 15 other enemy vehicles. 16 kills in a single day. The Sturmgeschütz was a dangerous opponent, a low-profile armoured vehicle built on a Panzer III chassis, mounting a 75mm gun capable of killing a Sherman at significant range. Oller put a round through it before its crew could bring the gun to bear. The 15 other vehicles, half-tracks laden with infantry, trucks carrying ammunition, armoured reconnaissance cars, all burned in the fields and on the roads of Belgium. Days later, at the town of Disson near the German border, In the Mood engaged a column of German half-tracks retreating east. 6 were destroyed in rapid succession, Oller firing, Boggs loading, Oller firing again, the turret traversing smoothly from target to target. Then Oller spotted a Panther tank at 1,500 yards. Nearly a mile. At that range, the 76mm armor-piercing round would lose velocity significantly. Penetration of the Panther's armor was not guaranteed, even against the side. But the Panther had not seen them. Its turret was facing away. Oller adjusted his aim, calculated the drop, and fired. The round struck the Panther's thinner side armor and penetrated. The German tank brewed up. Ammunition cooked off inside the hull. Black smoke rose over the Belgian countryside. Another kill. The count was still climbing. 200 vehicles destroyed, then 210, then 220, 230. The number grew with every engagement. Pool's reputation had spread through the entire 3rd Armored Division, then through the 7th Corps, then through the entire 1st Army. Reporters and war correspondents began making inquiries. Who was this tank crew from Texas that was destroying everything in front of them? Word reached the United States through Army channels and press dispatches. The Army's Public Affairs Office recognized the propaganda value. A tank crew with a score like this was good for civilian morale. A story like this sold war bonds. By the time the crew's combat run ended, their official tally stood at 258 enemy vehicles destroyed. 12 of those were tanks. The rest were the machinery of a retreating army, half-tracks, armoured cars, self-propelled guns, trucks, motorcycles, towed anti-tank guns, and supply vehicles. The crew was also credited with capturing approximately 250 enemy soldiers and killing or wounding more than 1,000 German troops. 81 days, 5 men, 3 tanks named In the Mood. And then, on September 19th, everything ended on a road outside Münsterbusch. The 3rd Armored Division had breached the Siegfried Line, the fortified defensive barrier that Germany had built along its western frontier. This was not a single wall. It was a defense in depth that stretched for nearly 400 miles from the Dutch border to Switzerland, concrete bunkers with interlocking fields of fire. Rows of dragon's teeth anti-tank obstacles, pyramidal concrete blocks designed to stop tracked vehicles, dense minefields seeded with anti-personnel and anti-tank mines, pre-registered artillery target zones, interconnected trench systems connecting strongpoints. The Germans had spent years building the West Wall, and they intended to hold it. The fighting around Aachen was grinding and vicious. Aachen held symbolic importance for Germany. It was the city of Charlemagne, the ancient seat of the Holy Roman Empire. Hitler had ordered it held at all costs. The Germans packed the approaches with elite troops, paratroopers, and veteran infantry divisions pulled from quiet sectors. Every road was mined. Every crossroads was covered by camouflaged anti-tank guns positioned to fire into the flanks of advancing vehicles. Every village had been fortified with machine gun nests in the basements and observation posts in the church towers. German soldiers fought with a fury that the Americans had not seen since the worst days of Normandy. These men were defending their homeland. Surrender was not in their vocabulary. The 3rd Armored Division pushed south of Aachen towards Stolberg, trying to outflank the city's defenses. The terrain was hilly and wooded, with narrow valleys and limited sight lines. Perfect country for anti-tank ambushes. The Germans knew it. They had prepared killing zones along every approach route. Pool led the column toward Münsterbusch on that September morning. The road was narrow. Trees lined both sides, their branches creating a canopy that blocked the sunlight. Poole stood in his open hatch, as always, scanning the shadows between the trees. The German gun was hidden in the tree line to the right. Some accounts identify it as a towed anti-tank gun. Others say it was a Panther lurking in a concealed position. What fired the rounds has never been definitively established. The effect does not depend on the weapon's identity. The first round hit the right side of In the Mood. Steel shrieked as the projectile punched through the hull. Metal fragments sprayed through the fighting compartment. Before Poole could shout a warning or Richards could throw the tank into reverse, a second round struck. This one hit with enough force to flip the 33-ton tank into a roadside ditch. Poole was thrown clear of the turret. He landed in the mud beside the road. His right leg was destroyed, nearly torn from his body below the knee. Arterial blood pulsed from the wound. He could see bone and torn muscle. Shock hit him like a wave. His hearing dimmed. The world narrowed to the sky above him, and the pain that was beginning to break through the adrenaline. Inside the wrecked tank, the crew fought to escape. Willis Oller was wounded in the leg. Wilbert Richards and Bertrand Close dragged themselves through the hatches and dropped to the ground. But one man in the turret that day was not one of the original Pups. Delbert Boggs, the regular loader, was absent. He had been sent to the rear the day before for dental work and a hearing test, part of the preparations for a planned war bond publicity tour back in the United States. His loader's seat had been filled by a replacement, Private First Class Paul Kenneth King. King had joined the crew only recently. Poole had invited the young man aboard to serve as the shell loader alongside Oller. Paul Kenneth King did not survive the second hit. He died in the turret of In the Mood on September 19, 1944. He was the first and only man killed in Poole's tank during those 81 days of combat. The 4 original Pups all survived every engagement, every ambush, every artillery barrage, every air attack, and every tank battle from Normandy to the Siegfried Line. King, the replacement, who was only there because Boggs had been ordered to the rear, was the one who paid the ultimate price. The surviving crew pulled Poole away from the burning tank. Medics arrived within minutes. They applied tourniquets, injected morphine, and loaded Poole onto a stretcher. He was evacuated to a field hospital, then to a larger facility in the rear, then eventually by hospital ship and transport back to the United States. Surgeons worked on his shattered leg for weeks. They tried every technique available to save it. They could not. His right leg was amputated above the knee. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, the deadliest tank commander in the American Army, would never stand on 2 legs again. He was 25 years old. Lieutenant Colonel Walter Richardson, Poole's battalion commander from Beaumont, Texas, spoke to a reporter from Yank, the Army Weekly, shortly after Poole was evacuated. "Poole is the tanker of tankers," Richardson said. "He can never be replaced in this regiment." Those words carried the weight of a man who had watched Poole fight for nearly 3 months and knew that no replacement, no matter how skilled, would fill that turret the same way. Sergeant Frank Woolner of Yank wrote the article that would define Poole's place in history. Published on September 22, 1944, the piece was titled Texas Tanker. Woolner documented the numbers in plain language. 258 enemy vehicles destroyed, 12 tanks, approximately 250 prisoners taken, more than 1,000 enemy killed or wounded. 81 days of continuous combat leading from the front. 3 Shermans lost, all named In the Mood. Every original crewman survived. Woolner described the score as fully authenticated. The article circulated through military installations worldwide and was later reprinted in the 3rd Armored Division's official history, Spearhead in the West, published in 1946. But the numbers deserve honest context, because accuracy matters more than mythology. Of those 258 vehicles, only 12 were tanks. The great majority were soft-skinned and lightly armored vehicles, trucks carrying supplies and ammunition, half-tracks transporting infantry to the front lines, armored reconnaissance cars probing American positions, towed anti-tank guns and their prime movers, self-propelled artillery pieces. These were not the glamorous targets that the word ace suggests. A truck does not look like a Panther tank. A half-track does not make the same headlines as a Tiger, but destroying them was arguably more important than destroying tanks. An armored division without its supply trucks cannot refuel its panzers. An infantry regiment without its ammunition carriers cannot defend its position. A retreating army without its transport vehicles cannot retreat, which means it stands and fights or it surrenders. The logistical tail of a modern army is its true vulnerability. Cut the tail and the teeth fall out. Poole's crew understood something fundamental about modern mechanized warfare that many people, even people who study it, sometimes overlook. You do not just kill the sword. You kill the hand that holds it and the arm that swings it and the body that carries it. 258 vehicles destroyed means 258 pieces of the German war machine that stopped working forever. Every burned truck meant supplies that never reached the front. Every destroyed half-track meant infantry that never arrived. Every silenced anti-tank gun meant an American tank somewhere that survived a battle it might otherwise have lost. Poole's superiors recommended him for the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. The recommendation was submitted twice through the chain of command. The first time, the paperwork was lost, not denied, not rejected. Simply lost in the avalanche of administrative documents generated by an army advancing hundreds of miles across France and Belgium in a matter of weeks. Records were packed into trucks that were themselves destroyed. Filing cabinets were abandoned in forward command posts that were dismantled overnight. The recommendation vanished. The second recommendation was processed properly. Officers at each level reviewed the evidence, the vehicle count, the Distinguished Service Cross action. The 3 tanks lost, and 3 tanks remounted without losing a day of combat. The 81 unbroken days on the front line. The evidence was compelling. No other tank crew in the entire American military had achieved anything close to this record. The recommendation reached the awards review board. The board studied the case carefully. They denied it. The official reason carried a bitter irony that would have made Poole shake his head. The board ruled that Poole's achievement was a crew effort, not an individual action. The Medal of Honor, the board determined, was intended to recognize individual heroism. What Poole had accomplished was extraordinary, but it was the product of 5 men working as a team, not one man acting alone. Therefore, it did not meet the criteria. The award was downgraded. Poole received the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, and the Purple Heart. The French government awarded him the Croix de Guerre with Bronze Star and the Legion of Honor at the rank of Chevalier. The Belgian government honored the entire 3rd Armored Division with the Belgian Fourragère. Poole also received the Bronze Order of St. George. These were significant medals. Any single one of them would mark a distinguished military career. Together, they represented a record that most combat soldiers could not match in a lifetime. But not the Medal of Honor. The one medal that would have acknowledged the full scope of what Poole and his pups had done was denied on the grounds that they had done it together. The cruelty of that logic has never faded. Poole turned down officer candidate school to stay with his crew. He refused battlefield commissions to stay with his crew. He chose, repeatedly and deliberately, to remain a staff sergeant, because that was the rank that kept him in the turret beside his men. His refusal to leave them, his insistence that every kill belonged to the crew, his loyalty to the 4 men who rode with him, those qualities were exactly what made the crew exceptional. And those same qualities became the justification for denying him the highest honor his country could bestow. The thing that made him great was used against him. Poole was discharged from the army in June of 1946. He was 26, missing a leg, carrying a chest full of medals that did not include the one he had earned, and facing civilian life for the first time in 5 years. He went home to Texas and opened a gas station. He pumped fuel and made change and watched the cars go by. He tried to be normal. It did not work. The man who had led every attack from the front could not stand behind a cash register. By 1948, Poole had reached out to Major General Roderick Allen, who helped him navigate the army bureaucracy to get recalled to active duty, with one leg. The army took him back because men like Poole do not come along often, and even the army's bureaucracy understood that. They could not put him inside a tank again, so they assigned him as a tank mechanics instructor. Lafayette Poole, the greatest tank commander in American history, spent his remaining military career standing on a prosthetic leg in motor pools and maintenance bays, showing privates and specialists how to change track pads, adjust idler wheels, bleed hydraulic lines, and keep a Sherman running in combat conditions. He taught them what the manuals could not. He taught them what it felt like when the engine started to overheat during a sustained advance. He taught them what that particular grinding sound meant when the transmission was about to fail. He taught them from experience that no textbook could replicate. Poole retired from the United States Army in September of 1960 as a chief warrant officer. He had entered as an enlisted private in 1941 and served for a total of 20 years. After retirement, Poole found two callings that seemed impossibly distant from the killing fields of France. He became a preacher, he found faith, and he shared it from a pulpit. He also became a Little League baseball coach, teaching children in Texas how to hit and throw and field ground balls. The hands that had gripped the turret ring of a Sherman tank in Normandy now turned the pages of a Bible and tossed batting practice to 10-year-olds. If the contradiction troubled him, he never said so. The war had one more price to extract from Lafayette Poole, and it was the cruelest one. His son, Captain Jerry L. Poole, followed his father into the army. He did not choose the safe path. He did not sit behind a desk. He joined Special Forces, the Green Berets, and the elite soldiers who operated behind enemy lines in the most dangerous theaters of the Cold War. Like his father, Jerry Poole went where the fighting was. On March 24, 1970, Captain Poole was on a mission in Cambodia during the expansion of the Vietnam War into that country. American Special Forces teams operated in the jungles along the Vietnamese border, running reconnaissance missions and interdiction operations against North Vietnamese supply routes. It was some of the most dangerous duty in the American military. Captain Jerry Poole went on one of those missions. He did not come home. He was listed as missing in action. No body was recovered. No remains were identified. No answers were given to his family. Lafayette Poole spent the last 21 years of his life not knowing whether his son was alive or dead. He had survived 81 days of combat in a Sherman tank. He had lost a leg. He had been denied the Medal of Honor. He had rebuilt his life on a prosthetic and a prayer. But this, the not knowing, the silence where his son's voice should have been, was worse than all of it. Every other wound had been visible. This one was invisible and it never healed. He carried that weight silently, the way he had carried everything else, without complaint, without public grief, without asking the world for pity. He died in his sleep on May 30th, 1991, at the age of 71. He was buried at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery in San Antonio, Texas, with full military honors. His son's remains were not identified until 2001, a full decade after Poole's death. Captain Jerry L. Poole was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Father and son, both soldiers, both buried in national military cemeteries hundreds of miles apart. One lost a leg in France. The other lost his life in Cambodia. The cost of military service measured across 2 generations. The crew of In the Mood scattered after the war ended and never fought together again. Willis Oller, the gunner whose eye had killed 258 vehicles, was badly wounded in the final engagement on September 19th. He spent 14 months in military hospitals. Surgeons performed 6 separate operations to save his left leg. They succeeded, but barely. He was discharged in February of 1946. Wilbert Richards, the driver who could thread a Sherman through a needle, survived the war and continued serving with the 3rd Armored Division. Bertrand Close, the teenage bow gunner they called Schoolboy, also survived and remained with the division. Delbert Boggs, the loader who missed the final battle because of a dental appointment and a hearing test, was reassigned to the 474th Air Service Group of the 9th Air Force. He was promoted to corporal and departed Europe in July of 1945. His brother, Private First Class Wilbert C. Boggs, who had served in the same regiment, had been killed in action on July 14, 1944, just 2 months before Poole's final battle. They never crewed a tank together again. The 5 men who had shared a steel box for 81 days, who had breathed the same engine exhaust and heard the same shells and killed 258 enemy vehicles and survived every engagement together, returned to separate lives in separate towns in separate states. The war made them a crew. Peace made them civilians. Time made them memories. In 1993, 2 years after Poole's death, the United States Army named a facility at Fort Knox, Kentucky, in his honor. The Poole Training Complex houses M1 Abrams main battle tank driver simulators. Young soldiers learning to drive the most powerful armored vehicle in the American arsenal, a 70-ton machine with a 120mm smoothbore cannon and composite armor that can defeat almost any anti-tank weapon in existence. Train inside a building named after a man who drove a 33-ton Sherman with a 76mm gun and 2 inches of steel plate. The gap between those two machines is the gap between 1944 and the modern era, a half-century of technological advancement. But the gap between those two eras' tank commanders is not a gap at all. The fundamentals have not changed. A crew is still 5 people locked in a steel box who live or die together. The commander still has to decide when to attack and when to hold. Courage still cannot be manufactured on an assembly line. Poole would have loved the Abrams. He also would have ridden with his head out of the hatch. In 2014, the film Fury placed a famous actor inside a Sherman tank as a character nicknamed War Daddy. The film depicted a 5-man crew fighting across Germany in the final weeks of the European War. The parallels to Poole were unmistakable. A staff sergeant who refused promotion, a crew that called their commander Daddy, a tank with a name painted on its hull. The filmmakers acknowledged no single specific inspiration, but military historians and veterans recognized the echoes immediately. The question that the Medal of Honor Board asked in 1944 still matters. Was Poole's achievement the work of 1 man or 5? The answer is both, and that is not a contradiction. 5 men pulled the triggers, turned the wheels, loaded the shells, and covered the flanks. But 1 man chose to stay in that turret when every promotion in the army was trying to pull him out. 1 man chose to ride with his head exposed when closing the hatch would have been safer. 1 man set the standard that turned a random collection of soldiers into the most lethal tank crew in American history. The crew made the kills. Poole made the crew. The concept of a tank ace has always been borrowed from fighter aviation, where a pilot flew alone, fought alone, and scored individual kills against individual opponents. The analogy never quite fit armored warfare. A tank is not a cockpit. A tank is a small room full of 5 men who will either live together or die together. Their fates are welded shut by the same steel plates that surround them. The word ace implies a lone genius. The reality of armored combat is the opposite. It is the most intimate form of team warfare ever devised. 5 men sharing the same air, hearing the same orders, feeling the same hits, trusting each other with their lives every second of every engagement. Poole understood this instinctively. That is why he refused to leave. Not because he craved combat, though he certainly did. Not because he wanted glory, though history has given him some. But because he knew that the crew only worked when all 5 parts were in their seats, doing their jobs, trusting the man beside them. He was the part that held the other 4 together. Remove him and the machine would have stopped. The army recognized this truth when they denied him the Medal of Honor, but they drew the wrong conclusion. The fact that Poole could not have done it alone did not diminish his contribution. It defined it. 258 vehicles, 81 days, 3 tanks lost, 3 tanks remounted, 1 name on every hull. 5 men in a steel box called In the Mood, driving east from Normandy to the German border, killing everything in front of them, surviving everything thrown at them, until a German gun on a September morning finally stopped the machine, but could not stop the man inside it. That is the story of War Daddy and his pups, and now you know it, but most people do not. Most people have never heard the name Lafayette Poole. That is where you come in. Hit that like button right now. Not for us, for them, for War Daddy and Red and Schoolboy and Groundhog and Jailbird, for Private First Class Paul Kenneth King, the replacement loader who died in the turret on the last day. Every like sends this video to someone new, someone who should know what this crew accomplished. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We dig through unit histories, after-action reports, award citations, and war correspondent archives to find stories like this one, stories that sit in filing cabinets while the world moves on. We pull them out. We tell them every week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us if someone in your family served in armor. Tell us their name and their unit. This comment section is a roll call, and every name matters. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. And thank you for making sure that Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole and the crew of In the Mood finally get the recognition that the United States Army refused to give them.